Number: The Apache Mother's Gift. A Western story script. The desert sun blazed mercilessly overhead as Sam Hayes guided his horse through the narrow canyon, the animal's hooves clicking against the sun-baked stones with a rhythm that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. At 41, Sam had spent the better part of 2 decades drifting across the southwestern territories, working cattle drives, mining claims, and whatever honest work a man could find in the unforgiving landscape of New Mexico territory. His weathered face bore the permanent squint lines of a man who had stared into too many desert sunrises, and his calloused hands gripped the reins with the easy confidence of someone who had learned to read the moods of both horses and the harsh country they traveled through. Today, like most days, he was alone except for his buckskin gelding, Buck, and the sparse provisions that kept them both alive in this land, where water was more precious than gold and shade was a blessing not to be taken lightly. Sam was following what the locals called the Devil's Backbone, a treacherous trail that wound through a series of red rock canyons toward the settlement of Copper Creek. He had business there with a cattle buyer who might have work for an experienced hand, though at his age, Sam was beginning to wonder how many more seasons he had left in him for the bone-jarring, back-breaking labor that defined life on the frontier. The sound reached him before he saw its source. 19. A thin, high wailing that might have been the wind through the rocks, but something in its rhythm told Sam's experienced ears that it was human voices raised in distress. He reined in Buck and listened carefully, his hand instinctively moving to rest on the grip of his Colt .45. In this country, unusual sounds often meant trouble, and trouble had a way of finding a man whether he went looking for it or not. The crying came again, definitely human now, and definitely young voices. Children, Sam realized with a sinking feeling in his stomach. Children alone in this wilderness rarely meant anything good, and his mind immediately jumped to the worst possibilities: Apache raids, bandits, families attacked while traveling through dangerous territory. He nudged Buck forward, following the sound through a maze of towering red sandstone walls that seemed to glow like fire in the afternoon light. The canyon narrowed until Sam could almost touch the walls on both sides, then opened abruptly into a circular chamber perhaps 50 yards across, with walls rising nearly 100 feet on all sides. What he saw there made his blood run cold. 2 small girls, neither of them appearing to be more than 8 or 9 years old, huddled together against the base of the canyon wall. Their long black hair and bronze skin identified them immediately as Apache, but their clothing was torn and dirty, and even from a distance, Sam could see that they were in desperate condition. One of the children appeared to be injured, lying motionless while her companion tried frantically to wake her. But it wasn't the sight of the children that made Sam's hand tighten on his gun. It was what lay scattered around the small clearing that told the real story of what had happened here. The remains of a small Apache camp were strewn about the canyon floor, torn blankets, scattered cooking pots, and the cold ashes of what had once been a fire. Most ominous of all were the dark stains on the rocks and sand that could only be blood. Sam dismounted carefully, his eyes constantly scanning the canyon walls for any sign of whoever had been responsible for this attack. The children hadn't noticed his approach yet, and he wanted to make sure he wasn't walking into an ambush before he revealed himself. Moving as quietly as his boots would allow on the rocky ground, Sam worked his way closer to where the girls were huddled. As he drew nearer, he could hear one of them speaking in what he assumed was Apache, her voice urgent and frightened as she tried to rouse her companion. When Sam was perhaps 20 feet away, the conscious girl suddenly became aware of his presence. She looked up with eyes that were far too old for her young face, dark pools that held terror, grief, and a fierce protectiveness that reminded Sam of a mother wolf defending her cubs. She said something in Apache that he couldn't understand, but the meaning was clear enough. To stay away. Sam slowly raised both hands to show he was no threat, then carefully removed his hat in what he hoped would be recognized as a gesture of respect. "Easy there, little one," he said in the gentlest voice he could manage. "I'm not going to hurt you. I want to help." The girl stared at him for a long moment, clearly trying to decide whether this strange white man represented salvation or another threat to be feared. Her companion stirred weakly, and Sam could see that she was badly hurt, though from what he couldn't yet determine. "Water," Sam said, pulling his canteen from his saddle horn and taking a small sip to show it was safe. "Agua." He used the Spanish word, hoping it might be more familiar to Apache children than English. At the mention of water, both girls' eyes widened with desperate hunger. Sam could see now that they were severely dehydrated, their lips cracked and their skin bearing the telltale signs of exposure to the brutal desert sun. Whatever had happened to their people? These children had been alone in this canyon for at least a day, possibly longer. Moving very slowly, Sam approached the girls and knelt down beside them, offering his canteen to the conscious child. She looked at him with suspicious eyes for another moment, then grabbed the water container and began drinking in desperate gulps. "Easy now," Sam said softly. "Not too fast, or you'll make yourself sick." When the first girl had drunk her fill, she immediately turned her attention to her injured companion, carefully dribbling water between the other child's cracked lips. Sam was struck by the fierce loyalty and care the older girl showed for her friend or sister. And Lev, it was clear that she would have died of thirst herself before abandoning the other child. As the injured girl began to stir and drink, Sam got his first clear look at her condition. She had a nasty gash on her forehead that had bled considerably, and her left arm hung at an unnatural angle that suggested it might be broken. But she was conscious now, and her eyes, while pain-filled, were alert. "Can you understand me?" Sam asked, speaking slowly and clearly. "English? Espanol?" The older girl nodded hesitantly. "Little," she said in heavily accented English. "Little English." Sam felt a surge of relief. Communication would be possible, even if limited. "What happened here? Where are your people?" The girl's face crumpled with grief, and she said something in Apache that needed no translation. Her gestures toward the scattered remains of the camp and the bloodstains on the rocks told the story clearly enough. Enough. Her people had been attacked, likely killed or scattered, leaving these two children alone in the wilderness. "Bad men," the girl said in English, struggling with the unfamiliar words. "Soldados. No, not soldados. Bad white men. Take everything. Kill." She couldn't finish the sentence, but Sam understood. Bandits or raiders had attacked the small Apache group, probably drawn by rumors of hidden gold, or simply acting out of racial hatred and greed. It was a story he had heard too many times before in his years on the frontier. "Your mama and papa?" Sam asked gently. The girl shook her head, tears now flowing freely down her dusty cheeks. "Gone. All gone. Only Aiyana and Citlali." She pointed to herself, and then to her injured companion. Sam felt his heart break a little at the sight of these two small survivors clinging to each other in their grief and terror. In his 2 decades on the frontier, he had seen enough violence and cruelty to last several lifetimes, but the sight of children suffering always affected him more deeply than he cared to admit. "Well, Aiyana," he said, carefully pronouncing the name as she had. "My name is Sam, and I'm going to help you and Citlali get out of here safely." The girl looked at him with a mixture of hope and doubt. "You help Apache children?" Why? It was a fair question, given the tensions between whites and Apaches that had defined this territory for generations. Sam thought for a moment about how to answer truthfully. "Because you're children," he said simply. "And children shouldn't have to suffer for the mistakes and hatred of grown-ups." Aiyana studied his face for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. She spoke rapidly to Citlali in Apache, and the younger girl nodded weakly. "We come with you," Aiyana said. "But you promise? No hurt, Citlali and Aiyana?" Sam placed his hand over his heart in a gesture he hoped would transcend language barriers. "I promise. No hurt. I help." As he began to examine Citlali's injuries more carefully and plan how to get both girls safely out of this canyon of death, Sam had no way of knowing that his simple act of compassion would set in motion events that would change not just his life, but his entire understanding of what it meant to be a man of honor in a land where honor was often in short supply. The desert sun continued its relentless journey across the sky. And somewhere in the vast wilderness beyond the canyon walls, other eyes were watching and waiting, preparing to test the depth of Sam Hayes's commitment to the promise he had just made. The journey out of the canyon proved more challenging than Sam had anticipated. Citlali's injuries were worse than they had first appeared. Her left arm was indeed broken, and she had suffered a severe concussion that left her dizzy and nauseous whenever she tried to move. Aiyana, while physically unharmed, was emotionally fragile and started at every sound, constantly scanning the canyon walls for signs of the men who had destroyed her world. Sam fashioned a crude sling for Citlali's arm from strips torn from his spare shirt and used his bandana to create a compress for the gash on her forehead. The girl was brave, rarely crying out even when he had to manipulate her broken arm to set the bone as best he could without proper medical supplies. "You're tough as rawhide, little sister," he told her gently as he worked. "Tougher than most grown men I've known." Aiyana translated for her companion, and Sam was rewarded with a weak smile from Citlali despite her obvious pain. The problem of transportation was more complex. Buck was a sturdy horse, but carrying 3 people across the rough desert terrain would be asking too much of even the most willing animal. Sam decided that he would walk, leading Buck while both girls rode together in the saddle. "Long way to town," Aiyana said as Sam helped lift both children onto Buck's broad back. "Very far for walking." Sam adjusted his hat against the brutal afternoon sun. "Don't you worry about me, little one. I've walked across half this territory at one time or another. A few more miles won't kill me." What he didn't mention was his growing concern about being caught in the open desert as evening approached. The temperature could drop 40 degrees or more once the sun went down, and neither of the girls was dressed for cold weather. More immediately worrying was the possibility that whoever had attacked their camp might still be in the area, hunting for survivors or simply looking for more victims to rob and kill. They made slow progress through the afternoon heat, stopping frequently to give Citlali sips of water and to allow Sam to rest his burning feet. The landscape around them was beautiful in its harsh way, endless vistas of red rock formations, sculpted by wind and water into fantastic shapes, with distant mountains shimmering like mirages in the heat haze. But Sam knew that beauty in the desert often concealed deadly dangers, and he kept his rifle ready across his shoulder as they traveled. As the sun began to sink lower in the western sky, painting the rocks around them in shades of gold and crimson, Aiyana suddenly tensed and pointed toward a distant ridge. "Smoke," she said urgently. "Someone make fire." Sam squinted in the direction she indicated, and could indeed make out a thin column of smoke rising from beyond a line of hills, perhaps 2 miles to their north. His first instinct was alarm. It could be the bandits who had attacked the Apache camp, making their own camp for the night. But as he studied the smoke more carefully, he began to think it might represent something else entirely. "Aiyana," he said carefully, "that smoke, is it the way your people would make a fire, or does it look like white men's fire?" The girl studied the distant smoke with eyes that had been trained from birth to read the subtle signs of the desert. "Apache fire," she said after a long moment. "Small, careful. White men make big fire. Waste wood." Sam felt a surge of hope mixed with anxiety. If there were Apache survivors from the attack, they might be searching for the 2 girls. But they might also view Sam as one of the enemy, especially if they found him in the company of Apache children who had clearly been through some kind of trauma. "Your people?" he asked. Aiyana shook her head uncertainly. "Maybe, but maybe not our band. Many Apache in this country." She looked at Sam with eyes that held both hope and fear. "What we do?" It was a question that went to the heart of Sam's character. The safe thing would be to avoid contact with any Apache warriors and continue toward Copper Creek, where he could turn the children over to the Indian agent or the army. But he could see in Aiyana's face how desperately she wanted to believe that some of her people might have survived, and he knew that these girls belonged with their own kind if that was possible. "We investigate," Sam said finally. "But carefully. If it's your people, good. If not, we get out of there fast." They changed direction, heading toward the source of the smoke with Sam now walking alongside Buck rather than leading him, his rifle ready for immediate use. As they drew closer, the terrain became more rugged, with numerous arroyos and rock formations that could conceal either friends or enemies. When they were perhaps a quarter mile from the smoke, Sam called a halt. "I'm going ahead alone to scout," he told Aiyana. "You and Citlali stay here with Buck. If you hear shooting or if I don't come back in an hour, you ride hard toward Copper Creek and don't look back." Aiyana's eyes widened with fear. "You leave us? Only if something bad happens to me," Sam assured her. "I just want to make sure it's safe before I bring you girls any closer." He left his rifle with the children. Aiyana clearly knew how to use it, and it would give them some protection if he didn't return. Taking only his pistol and his canteen, Sam began working his way through the maze of rocks and desert vegetation toward the smoke. As he drew closer, he could hear voices speaking in Apache. It's at least 3 different speakers, possibly more. The tone didn't sound hostile or excited, more like people having a normal conversation around a campfire. But Sam knew that could change quickly if they spotted him. From behind a large boulder, Sam finally got his first clear view of the Apache camp. What he saw there made his heart race with both relief and apprehension. 4 Apache warriors sat around a small, carefully banked fire, their weapons close at hand but not immediately threatening. 2 of them were older men with the bearing of experienced fighters, while the other 2 appeared to be younger, perhaps in their 20s. More importantly, Sam could see 3 Apache women and 2 small children. evidence that this was not a war party but rather a group of survivors, possibly from the same attack that had left Aiyana and Citlali orphaned. The question now was how to approach them without getting himself shot. Sam had learned enough Apache customs during his years on the frontier to know that walking into their camp uninvited would be seen as an act of aggression. But he also knew that these people might be desperate to know whether their missing children were alive. Taking a deep breath, Sam stood up from behind his boulder and raised both hands above his head in the universal gesture of peaceful intent. Then, in the loudest voice he could manage without shouting, he called out the only Apache words he knew. Peace. I bring children. The effect was immediate and dramatic. All 4 warriors leaped to their feet with weapons drawn, while the women quickly gathered the children behind them. For a long, tense moment, Sam stood frozen in place, wondering if he had just made the last mistake of his life. Then one of the older warriors called out something in Apache, and Sam heard a name that made his heart leap with hope. Aiyana. The Apache warrior who had spoken was a man of perhaps 50 years, with silver streaking his black hair and scars that spoke of many battles fought and survived. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, studied Sam with an intensity that seemed to see straight through to his soul. When he spoke again, his English was heavily accented but clear. You say you bring children. What children? Where? Sam kept his hands raised, acutely aware that 4 rifle barrels were trained on him and that his life hung on the next few words he spoke. 2 girls, Aiyana and Citlali. Found them in canyon, hurt and alone. Brought them safe. The reaction was immediate and emotional. One of the women cried out in Apache, and Sam could see tears streaming down her weathered face. The warrior who had been questioning him lowered his rifle slightly, though he remained ready to use it. Aiyana is daughter of my sister, the man said, his voice tight with emotion. Citlali is daughter of my brother. We searched for them since the attack. You have seen them? They live? They live, Sam confirmed. Citlali hurt but healing. Aiyana strong, takes care of her friend. They are safe, I promise. The warrior studied Sam's face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether this white man could be trusted. Finally, he said something to his companions in Apache, and the other weapons were lowered though not put away. I am called Grey Wolf in your tongue, the warrior said. These are my people, survivors of the attack on our camp. You will bring the children to us now. It wasn't a request, and Sam nodded his understanding. They are close, but first I need you to know. Citlali has broken arm, hurt head. She needs healing, not just family. Grey Wolf's expression softened slightly. My wife is skilled with injuries. She will care for Citlali. He gestured toward one of the women, a sturdy middle-aged Apache woman whose face showed both strength and compassion. Sam lowered his hands carefully. I go get them now. But they are frightened, especially Aiyana. She has seen much evil from white men. She may not trust easily. You are white man, Grey Wolf observed. Yet she came with you. Why does she trust you when she fears others? It was a fair question, and Sam thought carefully about his answer. Because I gave my word to help them, and I have kept that word. Sometimes, trust grows from small acts of kindness. Grey Wolf nodded slowly, as if Sam had passed some kind of test. Bring them. We will wait. Sam made his way back through the rocks to where he had left the girls with Buck. He found them exactly where he had left them, though Aiyana was clutching his rifle and scanning the landscape with the alertness of a seasoned scout. It's all right, Sam called out softly as he approached. Your uncle is there. Grey Wolf, with other family. Aiyana's eyes widened with disbelief and hope. Uncle? Grey Wolf lives? He lives, and he's been searching for you. Your aunt is there too, and she's going to take care of Citlali's injuries properly. For the first time since Sam had found them, Aiyana smiled, a radiant expression that transformed her young face and reminded Sam of how children were supposed to look when they felt safe and loved. The reunion that followed was one of the most moving scenes Sam had ever witnessed. When Grey Wolf saw his nieces approaching, he ran forward with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, gathering both girls into his strong arms despite Citlali's injuries. The women of the group wept openly as they embraced the children they had feared were lost forever. Sam stood aside, feeling like an intruder in this moment of profound family emotion. But Grey Wolf noticed his withdrawal and called him forward. Sam Hayes, the Apache leader said, having learned his name from Aiyana, you have given us back what we treasured most in this world. How does a man repay such a debt? Sam felt uncomfortable with the praise. No debt, he said simply. I did what anyone would do. Grey Wolf shook his head firmly. Many white men would have left Apache children to die in desert. You risked your life, used your water, walked in burning sun to bring them to safety. This is not what anyone would do. This is what a man of honor does. As the Apache women tended to Citlali's injuries with herbs and knowledge that Sam knew was far superior to his crude first aid, Grey Wolf drew him aside for a private conversation. The men who attacked our camp, the warrior said quietly, they were not soldiers, not Indian agents. They were bandits, led by a man with yellow hair and a scar across his face. They came in the night, killed many of our people, stole what they could carry. Sam felt his jaw tighten with anger. He had encountered such men before, scavengers who preyed on anyone they thought was weak or defenseless, caring nothing for the law or common decency. You know these men? Grey Wolf asked, noting Sam's expression. I know the type, Sam replied grimly. Probably heard rumors about Apache gold or silver. Decided to take what they wanted by force. Grey Wolf nodded. They spoke of treasure, yes. They tortured our men to make them tell where gold was hidden. But we are not wealthy people. We have no gold. Only what we need to survive. Did any of them escape? The bandits, I mean. Some died in the fighting, but most rode away when they realized we had nothing of value to steal. Grey Wolf's eyes hardened. They will attack others. This I know. Sam was quiet for a moment, thinking. Grey Wolf, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Are you and your people going to be all right here? Do you have what you need to survive while you rebuild your lives? The Apache leader studied Sam's face carefully. We will survive. We Apache are hard to kill, but it will be difficult, especially with children and wounded to care for. What if I told you I knew of a place where your people could stay safely while you recover? A place with good water and shelter, where you wouldn't have to worry about bandits or soldiers. Grey Wolf's eyes narrowed with suspicion. What place? And why would you offer this? Sam took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to propose would change his own life dramatically. My ranch. It's not much, but there's a good spring, some pasture land, and enough space for your people to make a temporary camp. You could stay there until you're strong enough to rejoin your main tribe or find a new place to settle. The offer hung in the air between them like smoke from the campfire. Sam could see Grey Wolf wrestling with the implications, the practical benefits of accepting help from a white man versus the cultural complications of such an arrangement. Why would you do this? Grey Wolf asked finally. What do you gain by helping Apache who have nothing to offer in return? Sam looked over at where Aiyana was helping her aunt tend to Citlali, her young face bright with the relief of being surrounded by family again. Because those two little girls trusted me when they had no reason to. Because your people have already lost too much to senseless violence. And because sometimes a man has to do what's right even when it doesn't make practical sense. Grey Wolf was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames of the small campfire. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a leader, making a decision that would affect his entire people. We will come to your ranch, Sam Hayes, but not as beggars seeking charity. We will work, we will contribute, we will earn our place there. And if trouble comes because of our presence, we will face it together. As Sam shook hands with the Apache leader, sealing an agreement that would bind their lives together in ways neither man could yet imagine, he felt a sense of rightness about the path he had chosen. He had no way of knowing that their troubles were far from over, or that the yellow-haired bandit with the scarred face was even now planning another attack that would test every man's courage and every alliance's strength. The desert stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack, a sound that could mean either danger or simply the wild freedom of creatures who belonged to no man's world. The 3-day journey to Sam's ranch tested everyone's endurance. Grey Wolf's band consisted of 11 people, 4 warriors, 3 women, 2 children besides Aiyana and Citlali, and 2 elderly men who moved slowly but never complained. Sam found himself impressed by their stoic determination and the way they worked together to overcome every obstacle the harsh terrain presented. Citlali's condition improved steadily under the care of her aunt, a skilled healer named Morningstar who seemed to know the medicinal properties of every plant in the desert. The girl's broken arm was properly set and splinted, and the herbs used to treat her head wound had reduced the swelling considerably. More importantly, her spirits had lifted dramatically, now that she was surrounded by family. Aiyana had attached herself to Sam like a loyal shadow, often walking beside Buck as he led the small procession across the sun-baked landscape. Her English was improving daily, and Sam found himself enjoying their conversations about everything from desert wildlife to the differences between Apache and white customs. "Why you live alone?" she asked on the second day as they rested in the shade of a towering red rock formation. "No wife? No children?" Sam adjusted his hat, thinking about how to answer such a direct question from a child. "Never found the right woman, I guess. Been moving around too much to settle down properly. Apache men need family," Aiyana observed with the matter-of-fact wisdom of childhood. "A lone man is like wolf without pack, Aiyana. Strong, but not complete." The comment stuck with Sam as they continued their journey. He had spent so many years drifting from job to job, town to town, that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to be part of something larger than himself. Now, watching the way Grey Wolf's people cared for each other and worked together, he was beginning to understand what he had been missing. On the evening of the second day, as they made camp in a sheltered arroyo, Grey Wolf approached Sam with a troubled expression. "We are being followed," the Apache leader said quietly, settling down beside the small fire where Sam was preparing coffee. Sam felt his blood chill. "How many?" "4, maybe 5 riders. They stay far back, but they follow our trail. Same men for 2 days now." Sam thought about the implications. Could be those bandits. Come back to finish what they started. Grey Wolf nodded grimly. "This is what I fear. They think perhaps we lead them to treasure they did not find in our camp. Or maybe they just don't like the idea of Apache children surviving their attack," Sam said, his voice hard with anger. "Some men take killing personal, like they need to finish the job." They discussed their options in low voices while the rest of the band settled down for the night. They could try to outrun their pursuers, but with wounded and elderly people in their group, that seemed unlikely to succeed. They could split up, with the warriors drawing the bandits away while the women and children continued to safety. But that would leave the non-combatants vulnerable if other threats emerged. "There is another choice," Grey Wolf said, finally. "We stop running and face them. Choose the ground for battle instead of letting them choose." Sam studied the Apache leader's weathered face in the flickering firelight. "You're talking about making a stand. I am talking about survival. These men will not stop hunting us as long as they think we might lead them to gold. Better to end it now, on ground we choose, than to fight them later when we are tired and they have had time to call for help." It was a warrior's logic, and Sam found himself nodding in agreement despite the risks involved. "What did you have in mind?" Grey Wolf smiled, and in that expression Sam caught a glimpse of the fierce fighter the man had once been. "There is a place ahead, maybe half-day's ride. Box Canyon with only one way in or out. If we can lure them into it, they'll be trapped," Sam finished. "But so will we if the plan goes wrong." "All plans have risk," Grey Wolf observed. "But some risks are worth taking to protect what matters most." They spent the next hour working out the details. The women, children, and elderly would continue toward Sam's ranch with one warrior as escort, while Sam, Grey Wolf, and the other 3 fighters would prepare an ambush in the canyon. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was better than continuing to run until exhaustion or bad luck caught up with them. The next morning, the group split up as planned. Sam watched Aiyana ride away with obvious reluctance, and she looked back at him with eyes that pleaded for him to stay safe. "You come to ranch soon?" she asked. "Soon as we can, little sister," Sam promised. "You take care of Citlali and help your aunt with the other children." "You take care of Uncle Grey Wolf," she replied with a solemnity that seemed far beyond her years. "He is all family we have left." The parting was emotional for all involved, but necessity drove them forward. Sam and the 4 Apache warriors rode hard toward the canyon Grey Wolf had described, a narrow slash in the red rock that would serve as either their salvation or their tomb. When they reached the canyon, Sam had to admit that Grey Wolf had chosen his ground well. The entrance was barely wide enough for 2 horses to ride abreast, and the walls rose nearly straight up for more than 100 feet. Anyone entering the canyon would be completely exposed to gunfire from the rim, with no cover and no easy way to retreat. They spent the morning positioning themselves on the canyon walls, with Grey Wolf and Sam taking positions on opposite sides of the entrance where they could create a crossfire, while the other 3 warriors spread out along the rim to prevent anyone from escaping once the shooting started. "Remember," Grey Wolf called across the canyon, "we want at least one alive to question. We need to know if there are more bandits coming, and where they are based." Sam checked his rifle one final time and settled down to wait. The desert sun climbed higher, turning the rock walls into a furnace that radiated heat like a giant oven. Sweat ran down his back and stung his eyes, but he remained motionless, knowing that their lives depended on patience and discipline. It was nearly noon when they heard the sound of approaching hooves echoing off the canyon walls. Sam counted the riders as they appeared at the canyon mouth. Of his walls, 5 men, just as Grey Wolf had estimated. The leader was exactly as the Apache had described. Yellow hair, a prominent scar across his left cheek, and the bearing of a man accustomed to taking what he wanted through violence. The bandits paused at the canyon entrance, clearly suspicious of the narrow opening. Sam held his breath, wondering if they would be smart enough to recognize the obvious trap, but greed won out over caution, as it so often did. The scarred leader spurred his horse forward into the canyon, and his companions followed. Within moments, all 5 riders were trapped in the narrow space with towering walls on both sides, and no way out except back the way they had come. "Now!" Grey Wolf shouted. The canyon erupted in gunfire. Sam's first shot took the leader's horse down, spilling the yellow-haired man onto the rocky ground. The other Apache warriors opened fire simultaneously, and the narrow space filled with the thunder of rifles and the screams of wounded horses. The fight was brief but vicious. 2 of the bandits died in the first volley, caught completely by surprise with no cover to protect them. A third tried to surrender but was shot down by his own panicked companions. The fourth managed to turn his horse and race back toward the canyon entrance, only to run directly into Grey Wolf's rifle. When the gun smoke cleared, only the scarred leader was still alive, clutching a wounded shoulder and cursing in languages Sam didn't recognize. Grey Wolf climbed down from his position and approached the wounded bandit with his rifle ready. "You the one who attacked Apache camp?" the warrior asked in English. The bandit spat blood and glared at his captor with hate-filled eyes. "Go to hell, Redskin." Grey Wolf's expression didn't change, but Sam could see the controlled fury in the Apache leader's stance. "You killed women and children. You tortured old men. Why?" "Because we could," the bandit snarled. "And because someone's paying good money to make sure all you savages end up dead or driven out of this territory." This revelation hit both Sam and Grey Wolf like a physical blow. The attack hadn't been random banditry motivated by greed, ADICV. It had been a paid contract, part of some larger plan to eliminate Apache presence in the region. "Who pays you?" Grey Wolf demanded, pressing the muzzle of his rifle against the bandit's wounded shoulder. The man screamed in pain but shook his head stubbornly. "I ain't telling you nothing. Kill me if you want, but I ain't talking." Sam stepped forward, an idea forming in his mind. "Maybe he doesn't have to tell us. Maybe we can find out for ourselves." He began searching through the dead bandits' saddlebags and personal effects, looking for anything that might provide a clue to their employer's identity. In the leader's coat pocket, he found something that made his blood run cold, a letter bearing the official letterhead of the Territorial Indian Bureau, signed by a name that was well known throughout the Southwest. "Grey Wolf," Sam said quietly. "I think our problems are a lot bigger than we thought." The letter Sam had found in the bandit leader's pocket was dated just 1 week earlier, and bore the official seal of the Territorial Indian Bureau. As Sam read it aloud in the shelter of the canyon, both he and Grey Wolf realized they were facing something far more dangerous than random attacks by desperate men. To Captain Reynolds, Sam read, his voice growing harder with each word. "Your services are required for the final phase of our pacification program. All Apache bands remaining in the designated zones must be eliminated or relocated before the railroad survey can proceed. Payment will be made upon confirmation of mission completion. Signed, Commissioner Harrison Webb." Grey Wolf's face had gone granite hard as he listened. "Webb. I know this name. He is the one who promises our people land and peace, then breaks every treaty when white settlers want what we have been given." The wounded bandit, apparently realizing his situation was now hopeless, began talking without further prompting. "Webb's got contracts with half the gun hands in the territory," he gasped, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Pays triple rates for any Apache scalps we bring in. Bonus money for clearing out whole camps." Sam felt sick to his stomach. How many others? How many more bands has he targeted? "All of them," the bandit wheezed. "Every Apache group from here to the Mexican border. Railroad company wants the land clear before they start laying track. Webb promised them it would be done by winter." Grey Wolf stood silent for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what they had learned. This wasn't just about his small band of survivors, DSA'd. It was genocide disguised as government policy, with the backing of powerful business interests. "There is more," the bandit continued, perhaps hoping cooperation might save his life. "Webb's got a special bounty on you specifically, Grey Wolf. $500 for your scalp. dead or alive. Says you're too dangerous to let live. Sam looked at his Apache companion with new understanding. That's why they kept following us. It wasn't just about finding treasure. They were hunting you personally, and they will keep coming, Grey Wolf said quietly. More men, better armed, until they succeed or Webb decides the cost is too high. The bandit laughed bitterly, blood flecking his lips. Costs don't matter to Webb. He's got backing from railroad money, mining money, cattle money, all the big interests that want this territory cleared of Indians. Sam helped Grey Wolf drag the wounded man to a shaded spot and gave him water from his canteen. What's your name? Sam asked. Reynolds. Captain Marcus Reynolds, late of the Confederate Army and currently employed as a contractor for the Territorial Indian Bureau. Grey Wolf's expression darkened further. You were soldier? You swore oath to protect people, not murder women and children. Reynolds spat in the dirt. I swore an oath to the Confederacy, and look how that turned out. Now I fight for whoever pays best. Apache, Mexican, doesn't matter to me. They're all in the way of progress. Progress, Sam repeated, his voice heavy with disgust. That what you call murdering families in their sleep? I call it business, Reynolds replied coldly. This territory's going to be settled by white folks whether you like it or not. I'm just helping speed up the inevitable. Grey Wolf knelt beside the wounded bandit, his voice deadly quiet. You speak of inevitable. Let me tell you what is inevitable. If you do not help us stop this madness, your own people will suffer as much as mine. Men like Webb do not stop with killing Indians. They kill anyone who stands between them and what they want. Reynolds looked up at the Apache leader with surprise. You offering me some kind of deal? I am offering you chance to redeem yourself, Grey Wolf replied. Help us stop Webb, and you live, continue to serve his evil, and you die here in this canyon like your companions. Sam studied the wounded man's face, trying to read his intentions. What would you want him to do? Webb expects report from Reynolds about our band being eliminated, Grey Wolf explained. What if Reynolds tells him we are all dead, but that he discovered evidence of larger Apache force gathering to the south? Send Webb's attention away from us while we plan how to expose his crimes. It was a clever strategy, but Sam could see the obvious flaw. What's to stop Reynolds from betraying us the moment we let him go? Reynolds himself answered. Because I'm a dead man either way if I go back to Webb empty-handed. He don't tolerate failure, and he sure don't pay for incomplete jobs. So you help us because it serves your own interests, Grey Wolf observed. Best reason there is, Reynolds admitted. Self-preservation beats loyalty every time. Sam looked between the Apache leader and the wounded bandit, weighing their limited options. Even if we could trust him, how do we prove what Webb is doing? It's his word against ours, and he's got the backing of the territorial government. Grey Wolf smiled grimly. Not if we can get evidence that even territorial governor cannot ignore. Webb is careful, but all men make mistakes when they think they are safe. What kind of evidence? Reynolds asked, wincing as he shifted position. Papers, letters, orders for weapons and payment. Men like Webb keep records of everything, in case they need to prove their actions were authorized. Sam began to see where Grey Wolf was heading with this. You want to break into Webb's office? I want to expose him for what he is, a criminal hiding behind government authority. But first, we must make sure our people are safe. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning their next moves. Reynolds would ride back to Webb and report that Grey Wolf's band had been eliminated, but that he had discovered signs of a much larger Apache gathering near the Mexican border that would require additional forces to handle. This would hopefully buy them time to get their people to safety and gather evidence against the corrupt commissioner. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in shades of red and gold, Sam helped Reynolds onto his horse. The bandit's shoulder was roughly bandaged, and he looked pale from blood loss, but he was conscious and able to ride. Remember, Grey Wolf warned him, if you betray us, there is nowhere you can hide that Apache warriors will not find you. Reynolds nodded weakly. I understand, but you better move fast. Webb's got more men coming from Denver, and they'll be here within the week. After Reynolds rode away, Sam and Grey Wolf began their own journey back toward the ranch, pushing hard to reach their people before any new threats could emerge. As they rode through the gathering darkness, Sam found himself thinking about how completely his life had changed in just a few days. Grey Wolf, he said as they paused to rest their horses, what happens after we stop Webb? What happens to your people then? The Apache leader was quiet for a long moment. I do not know. Perhaps we find new place to live in peace. Perhaps we fight until there are no more of us left to fight. But whatever happens, we face it with honor. And what about Aiyana and Citlali? What kind of future do they have in a world where men like Webb hold power? Grey Wolf looked at Sam with eyes that reflected the starlight. They have future because men like you choose to help them. Because you showed them that not all white men are enemies, that some still believe in doing what is right. As they resumed their ride toward the ranch, Sam realized that Grey Wolf was wrong about one thing. This wasn't about him choosing to help Apache children. This was about those children helping him find his way back to the man he had always wanted to be. Behind them, the canyon where they had faced the bandits was already being reclaimed by the desert, wind and sand, erasing the evidence of violence. But ahead of them lay challenges that would test not just their courage, but their faith in the possibility that justice could triumph over greed and hatred, in a land where both were all too common. Sam and Grey Wolf reached the ranch just after dawn on the fourth day, their horses lathered with sweat and both men exhausted from pushing hard through the night. What they found there filled Sam with a pride he had never experienced before. His modest homestead had been transformed into a thriving temporary village. The Apache women had established a well-organized camp near the main house, with sleeping areas, cooking fires, and workspaces laid out with military precision. Morning Star and the other healers had set up a medical area under a canvas lean-to, where they tended not only to Citlali's continuing recovery but also to various minor injuries and ailments that had been neglected during their flight from the bandits. Most remarkably, the entire group had thrown themselves into improving the ranch itself. The men had repaired the sagging fence around the horse corral, cleared brush from the spring to improve water flow, and begun construction of a more substantial shelter for the livestock. The women had planted a garden using seeds they had carried from their destroyed camp, and even the children were contributing by gathering eggs from the wild chickens that had made their home in the rocks near the house. Aiyana was the first to spot their approach, and she came running with a joy that made Sam's heart swell. "Sam, Uncle Grey Wolf, you are safe." She threw herself into Sam's arms with an enthusiasm that caught him off guard, and for a moment he understood what it might feel like to have a daughter of his own. Grey Wolf received an equally enthusiastic greeting, and soon the entire camp had gathered to hear about their encounter with the bandits. When Sam and Grey Wolf finished relating their story, including the disturbing discovery of Webb's involvement, the reaction was a mixture of anger and determination. The older Apache warriors discussed the implications in rapid, urgent conversations, while the women began making practical preparations for whatever might come next. "How long do we have?" asked Swift Eagle, Grey Wolf's lieutenant and most trusted advisor. "Reynolds said more men are coming from Denver," Grey Wolf replied. "Perhaps a week, maybe less. We must assume Webb will discover the deception quickly." Morning Star, who had been listening quietly while tending to a sick child, now spoke up. "Then we must leave this place. It is not safe for anyone now, Apache or white." Sam felt a surprising pang of loss at the suggestion. In just a few days, his lonely ranch had become more of a home than any place he had lived in 20 years. But he knew she was right. By harboring Apache refugees, he had made himself a target of Webb's campaign. "Where would we go?" he asked. "Webb has contracts with gunmen all over the territory." Grey Wolf had been thinking about this problem during their long ride. "There is place," he said slowly. "Old Apache stronghold in mountains to the south. Very difficult to reach, easy to defend. My grandfather's grandfather fought from there against Spanish soldiers, but it is many days' travel," Swift Eagle pointed out. "Women and children, old ones, they cannot move quickly across such distance." Aiyana, who had been listening to the adult conversation, with the serious attention children give to matters they sense are important, suddenly spoke up. "What about Iron Horse?" Everyone turned to look at her, not understanding what she meant. "Train," she explained, proud of her growing English vocabulary. "Sam works for railroad. Maybe railroad help us go far away, faster than horses." Sam stared at the young girl, amazed by her insight. "Aiyana, that might actually work." He began thinking out loud, his excitement growing. "There's a freight train that runs through Copper Creek twice a week, heading south toward El Paso. If we could get your people onto that train." "Railroad men work for same people who pay Webb," Grey Wolf pointed out skeptically. "Why would they help Apache?" "Because not all railroad men are part of Webb's scheme," Sam replied. "My friend Tom Bradley is the section foreman in Copper Creek, and he's an honest man." If I explained the situation, Grey Wolf considered this possibility. "It is risky. If your friend betrays us." "He won't," Sam said with confidence. Tom's got daughters of his own. When he sees what Webb is doing to children, he'll help. Morningstar had been examining Citlali during this conversation, and now she joined the discussion. Child is strong enough to travel now. Broken arm heals well. Head injury causes no more problems. Then we try the train, Grey Wolf decided. But we must be very careful. If Webb learns we are still alive, he will send every gun in the territory after us. They spent the rest of the day making preparations. The Apache would travel light, taking only essential possessions and leaving behind anything that might slow them down. Sam packed his own belongings, surprised by how little he really needed after so many years of accumulating things he thought were important. As evening approached, Sam found himself sitting by the spring with Aiyana, watching the sun set behind the mountains that surrounded his valley. The little girl had been unusually quiet since learning they would have to leave the ranch. You sad about going? Sam asked gently. Aiyana nodded. This is good place. Safe place. Like home. Sam felt his throat tighten. I'm going to miss it too, little sister. But sometimes we have to leave good places to find better ones. You come with us? To Mountain Stronghold? The question struck Sam like a physical blow. In all their planning, he had somehow assumed he would be staying behind, that his role was simply to help get the Apache to safety before resuming his own life. But now he realized that his old life no longer existed. Webb would never let him live after what he had learned. I don't know, he said honestly. I'm not Apache. I might not be welcome in such a sacred place. Aiyana looked at him with eyes that seemed far too wise for her age. Uncle Grey Wolf says you have Apache heart. Says you fight for family like warrior, care for children like father. Maybe blood not matter so much. That evening, as the camp settled down for what might be their last night at the ranch, Grey Wolf approached Sam for a private conversation. They walked together to the corral where Sam's horses stood peacefully grazing, unaware that their quiet world was about to change forever. There is something I must tell you, Grey Wolf said. Something about Apache custom you may not understand. Sam waited, sensing that whatever the warrior had to say was important. When man saves Apache children, when he risks his life for people, not his blood, Apache law says he becomes family, not honorary family, real family, with all duties and rights that come with such bond. Sam felt his pulse quicken. What are you saying? I am saying that you are now brother to my people, uncle to Aiyana and Citlali, son to Morningstar who has no sons left living. If you choose to accept this honor, the offer left Sam speechless. He had spent 41 years as a drifter, belonging to no one and having no one belong to him. Now he was being invited to become part of something that was deeper than friendship, stronger than mere alliance. What would that mean? He asked finally. What would be expected of me? Grey Wolf smiled. Same thing expected of any Apache man. Protect family. Provide for those who cannot provide for themselves. Teach children right way to live. Face danger with courage. And if I accepted this honor, would I be welcome at your grandfather's stronghold? You would not just be welcome, Grey Wolf replied. You would be helping to guard one of our most sacred places. Great responsibility, but also great honor. As Sam considered this life-changing offer, he found himself thinking about all the years he had spent searching for something he could never quite name. Now, watching Aiyana help her aunt prepare the evening meal, seeing the way the Apache families cared for each other even in the midst of terrible danger, he realized he had found what he had been looking for all along. I accept, he said simply. Grey Wolf clasped his hand in the traditional Apache manner. Then tomorrow we begin journey not as white man helping Indians, but as family traveling together to new home. That night, as Sam lay in his bedroll looking up at the stars that seemed brighter and more numerous than he had ever noticed before, he felt a peace settle over him that he had never experienced. For the first time in his adult life, he knew exactly who he was and where he belonged. But even as he drifted off to sleep, he was unaware that riders were already approaching from the north, men who had come to finish what Reynolds had started, and who would not be fooled by any deception about dead Apache bands. The attack came in the darkest hour before dawn, when even the desert creatures had settled into sleep and the world lay hushed under a canopy of stars. Sam woke to the soft touch of Grey Wolf's hand on his shoulder, and the whispered words that every frontiersman dreaded, riders coming. Many riders. Sam was instantly alert, years of dangerous living having trained him to shake off sleep like a dog shaking off water. Around the camp, the Apache were already moving with the silent efficiency of people who had learned that survival often depended on quick, Quiet action. Children were being awakened and dressed. Weapons distributed. Horses quietly saddled. How many? Sam whispered as he checked his rifle. 20, maybe more. Grey Wolf replied grimly. They spread out wide, try to surround us. Professional fighters, not like the bandits we faced before. Through the darkness, Sam could hear the distant sound of many horses moving carefully across the rocky ground. Whoever was leading this force knew their business. They were taking time to position their men properly rather than charging in blindly. Reynolds betrayed us, Sam said, though without surprise. He had never trusted the wounded bandit, despite their temporary alliance. Or Webb discovered deception on his own, Grey Wolf suggested. Does not matter now. What matters is getting our people away safely. Morning Star appeared beside them, her face calm despite the danger. Children and old ones ready to travel. Swift Eagle and 2 warriors will lead them to Hidden Canyon where we waited before. Rest of us will delay enemies here. Sam felt his heart clench at the thought of Aiyana and Citlali being forced to flee once again. How long do we need to hold them? Sunrise in 2 hours, Grey Wolf calculated. By then, our people will be far enough away to reach safety even if pursued. That's a long time to hold off 20 professional gunmen, Sam observed. Grey Wolf's smile in the darkness was fierce. Apache know this land like white men know inside of their own houses. We make them pay for every yard they advance. The next few minutes were spent in rapid preparation. The non-combatants slipped away into the darkness with pack horses carrying essential supplies, while the fighters took positions around the ranch buildings and corral. Sam found himself crouched behind his own woodpile, rifle ready, waiting for enemies he couldn't see to begin an assault that would likely kill them all. The waiting was the hardest part. Every sound seemed amplified in the pre-dawn stillness. The creak of leather, the soft snort of a horse, the whisper of wind through the sagebrush. Sam's palms grew slick with sweat despite the cool air, and he had to consciously control his breathing to keep his hands steady. When the attack finally came, it erupted with devastating suddenness. Muzzle flashes bloomed like deadly flowers in the darkness as rifle fire poured in from 3 directions at once. Bullets whined off the rock walls of Sam's house, shattered windows, splintered the wooden fence posts. Sam returned fire at the muzzle flashes, not knowing if his shots were finding targets but determined to make the attackers pay for their aggression. Around the ranch, the Apache warriors were firing with deadly precision, their knowledge of the terrain allowing them to remain hidden while picking off the silhouettes of men who showed themselves against the starlit sky. Sam, Grey Wolf called from his position near the corral. They try to flank us from the south. Can you see them? Sam squinted into the darkness and caught sight of shadowy figures working their way through the rocks that bordered his property on that side. He shifted position and began firing at the moving shapes, forcing them to take cover and slowing their advance. The gunfight continued for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes. Gradually, Sam became aware that the volume of return fire was decreasing. Either the Apache marksmen were taking a toll on their attackers, or the survivors were becoming more cautious about exposing themselves. As the eastern horizon began to show the first pale hint of dawn, a voice called out from the darkness with the distinctive accent of an educated Easterner. You in the ranch house. This is Deputy Marshal Clayton, acting under federal authority. You're harboring fugitive Indians in violation of territorial law. Surrender now and you won't be harmed. Grey Wolf's voice came back immediately, speaking English with quiet dignity. We are not fugitives. We are survivors of illegal attack by hired killers. We demand protection under federal law. You have no rights under federal law, Clayton shouted back. You're hostiles who've been making war on peaceful settlers. Come out with your hands up and you'll get fair trials. Sam felt his anger flare at the obvious lies. These weren't federal marshals. They were more of Webb's hired killers, probably given some kind of fake badges to make their actions seem official. They're lying, Sam called out. We know about Commissioner Webb and his bounty system. We know about the contracts to eliminate Apache bands. The response was immediate, a renewed burst of gunfire that forced Sam to duck behind his makeshift fortifications. But he noticed something significant. The shots were coming from fewer positions now, suggesting that several of their attackers had indeed been eliminated. As full daylight approached, Sam could finally get a clear look at their situation. Bodies lay scattered around the ranch, evidence that the Apache warriors' marksmanship had been as deadly as their reputation suggested. But there were still at least a dozen attackers in position, and they were beginning to coordinate their movements for what looked like a final assault. Grey Wolf, Sam called. They're getting ready to rush us. I see it. the Apache leader replied. When they come, we make them pay dear for this place. But even as they prepared for what might be their last stand, Sam heard a sound that filled him with both hope and terror. DOD. The distant whistle of a train approaching Copper Creek. Tom Bradley and the morning freight were arriving right on schedule, completely unaware that they were about to roll into the middle of a war. The train, Sam said to himself, then louder. Grey Wolf, the train's coming. I hear it, Grey Wolf replied. If we can reach it, we'd have to cross a quarter-mile of open ground with a dozen rifles trained on us, Sam pointed out. That's suicide. Maybe, Grey Wolf acknowledged. But maybe not, if we time it right. Before Sam could ask what the Apache leader had in mind, the final assault began. Clayton's men charged from 3 directions at once, hoping to overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers and firepower. The ranch yard erupted in gunfire and war cries as desperate men fought for their lives. Sam's rifle grew hot in his hands as he fired as fast as he could work the lever, trying to stop the wave of attackers sweeping toward his position. He saw Grey Wolf leap from cover with a war cry that seemed to shake the very mountains, firing his rifle until it was empty, then drawing his knife to meet the enemy hand to hand. The fighting was fierce and brief. When it ended, 5 of Clayton's men lay dead in Sam's yard, but Grey Wolf was wounded and bleeding, and Sam himself had taken a bullet in his left shoulder that left his arm nearly useless. Is over? Grey Wolf asked weakly, clutching a gash across his ribs. Sam looked around at the carnage and nodded grimly. For now. But if any of them got away, they'll be back with more men. As if summoned by his words, the train whistle blew again, much closer now. Through the settling gun smoke, Sam could see the locomotive approaching the water stop near Copper Creek, completely unaware of the battle that had just taken place. We need to get to that train, Sam said, helping Grey Wolf to his feet. It's our only way out of here. What about our people? Grey Wolf asked. They will be waiting at the canyon. We'll have to find another way to reach them, Sam replied. Right now, we need medical attention, and we need to get word to someone in authority about what Webb is doing. Supporting each other, the 2 wounded men began the painful journey across the desert toward the railroad, leaving behind the only home Sam had ever truly known but carrying with them a bond forged in battle and sealed with blood. Behind them, smoke rose from the burning ranch buildings that Clayton's surviving men had set ablaze in their retreat. But ahead lay the possibility of justice, if they could survive long enough to tell their story to people who still believed that right and wrong mattered more than profit and politics. The journey to the railroad took nearly 2 hours, with both wounded men supporting each other across the rocky desert terrain as the morning sun climbed higher and the heat became oppressive. Sam's shoulder throbbed with every step, and he could see that Grey Wolf was struggling to stay conscious despite the crude bandage they had fashioned for his side. When they finally reached the outskirts of Copper Creek, Sam was relieved to see Tom Bradley's familiar figure supervising the loading of supplies onto the freight train, but his relief turned to concern when he noticed several strangers in town, men who wore their guns low and had the hard look of professional fighters. More of Webb's people, Grey Wolf observed quietly. They watch for us. Sam studied the situation carefully. The train would be departing within the hour, and it represented their best chance of escaping the territory alive. But getting aboard meant crossing the open area around the depot, where they would be completely exposed to anyone watching for them. Tom, Sam called out, staying hidden behind a pile of railroad ties. Tom Bradley, the section foreman, looked up from his work, scanning the area until he spotted Sam's position. His face went pale when he saw the blood on Sam's shirt and the wounded Apache warrior beside him. Sam, what in blazes happened to you? Can't explain now, Sam replied urgently. But I need your help, and I need it quick. There are men in town who want to kill us both. Tom glanced around nervously, noting the same suspicious strangers that Sam had observed. What kind of trouble are you in? The kind that involves corrupt government officials and hired killers, Sam said. Tom, I need you to trust me. Can you get us onto that train without those men seeing us? Tom Bradley had worked with Sam for 3 years and knew him to be an honest man who didn't seek trouble. Without asking further questions, he nodded grimly. Load yourselves into that empty cattle car at the rear of the train. I'll make sure no one bothers you until we're well clear of town. Sam and Grey Wolf made their way carefully to the cattle car Tom had indicated, using the train itself as cover to avoid being seen by Webb's watchers. The car smelled strongly of animals and hay, but it offered concealment and a way out of immediate danger. As the train pulled away from Copper Creek, Sam allowed himself to feel a moment of relief. They had escaped the immediate threat, but he knew their troubles were far from over. Webb would not give up easily, and they would need more than just their own testimony to convince anyone in authority of what was happening. "Where does this train go?" Grey Wolf asked, settling carefully into a corner of the cattle car. "El Paso first, then on to San Antonio," Sam replied. "Tom says there's a federal judge in San Antonio who's supposed to be honest. If we can reach him with proof of what Webb is doing." "What proof do we have except our words?" Grey Wolf pointed out. "Webb will say we are lying, trying to avoid punishment for crimes." Sam pulled the letter they had taken from Reynolds out of his coat pocket. "We have this, written in Webb's own hand, ordering the elimination of Apache bands." Grey Wolf examined the letter carefully. "Is good start. But Webb will say letter is forgery, that we made it to protect ourselves." "Then we need more proof," Sam said. "We need someone who was involved in Webb's scheme to testify against him." "Reynolds, if we can find him, and if he's still alive after betraying us to Clayton's men." The train rolled on through the afternoon, carrying them away from the scene of their recent battles but toward an uncertain future. Sam used the time to tend to Grey Wolf's wounds as best he could with limited supplies, while the Apache warrior shared his knowledge of the territory they were entering. "My people have friends among the Mexican Apache," Grey Wolf said. "If we cannot find help from your government, perhaps we can cross border, start new life in Mexico." Sam considered this possibility. "What about Aiyana and Citlali? What about the other survivors from your band? They know to go to the old stronghold if all else fails. Is place where Apache have hidden from enemies for many generations. They will be safe there, even if we cannot return to them." As evening approached and the train made a scheduled stop at a small depot, Tom Bradley made his way back to their cattle car with food, water, and news that made Sam's blood run cold. "There's been telegrams flying back and forth all afternoon," Tom reported quietly. "Word is that Commissioner Webb has declared a general uprising by hostiles in the territory. He's requested military assistance to deal with what he's calling a threat to all peaceful settlers." "How many troops?" Sam asked. "Full regiment of cavalry, plus volunteer militia companies from 3 counties. They're mobilizing as we speak." Grey Wolf absorbed this news with stoic calm. "So now we are not just fugitives, but leaders of imaginary uprising. Webb covers his crimes by making us appear to be what he claims we are." "There's more," Tom continued. "Webb's put out wanted posters on both of you. Sam, there's a $1,000 bounty on your head, dead or alive. Says you've gone renegade, joined up with hostiles to raid settlements." Sam felt a bitter laugh escape his throat. "A week ago I was a railroad worker with a small ranch and no enemies. Now I'm supposedly a dangerous renegade worth $1,000. "Webb is clever," Grey Wolf observed. "He creates story that explains everything. Why Apache attacks increased, why white man would help Apache, why military action is necessary. All lies, but lies that people will want to believe." Tom looked uncomfortable with the conversation, but he pressed on. "Sam, there's one more thing. Word came through about your ranch. It was completely destroyed in what the reports are calling an Indian attack. According to the official version, you were killed defending your property from Grey Wolf's war party." The news hit Sam harder than he had expected. He had known his ranch was gone, but hearing it described as the scene of his own death in a fabricated Indian attack made the loss seem complete and final. His entire life had been wiped out and replaced with a lie that served Webb's purposes. "So officially, we are both dead," Grey Wolf said. "This makes us harder to capture but also means we cannot ask for help from law enforcement." "Not necessarily," Tom said, producing a folded document from his pocket. "I've been thinking about this situation, and I took the liberty of writing down everything I know about Webb's activities. Signed and witnessed, ready to be presented to proper authorities." Sam looked at his friend with gratitude and surprise. "Tom, you don't have to get involved in this. You've got a family to think about." "I've got a family to protect," Tom replied firmly. "And if men like Webb can get away with genocide disguised as government policy, none of our families will be safe. My daughters deserve to grow up in a country where justice means something." As the train resumed its journey through the night, Sam found himself thinking about the chain of events that had brought him to this point. It had started with simple compassion for 2 frightened Apache children, but it had grown into something much larger, a battle for the soul of the American frontier. Looking at Grey Wolf, who was resting but alert despite his wounds, Sam realized that their fight was far from over. Webb had the backing of powerful interests and the machinery of territorial government, but they had something equally valuable: to the truth, and the courage to speak it, regardless of the personal cost. "Grey Wolf," Sam said quietly. "When we reach San Antonio, what do we do if the federal judge won't listen to us?" The Apache leader was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Then we go back to the mountains, gather all Apache bands willing to fight, and show Webb what real uprising looks like." It was a prospect that filled Sam with both dread and determination. He had never wanted to be a warrior, but sometimes circumstances chose a man's path for him. If peaceful means failed, he would stand beside his Apache brothers and fight for justice, whatever the cost. Outside the cattle car, the Texas landscape rolled past under a canopy of stars, vast and indifferent to the human struggles taking place beneath it. But somewhere in that wilderness, two Apache girls were learning that kindness could exist between peoples, and that sometimes strangers could become family through shared trials and mutual sacrifice. The federal courthouse in San Antonio was an imposing limestone building that seemed to radiate the power and authority of the United States government. As Sam and Grey Wolf approached its steps in the early morning light, both men were acutely aware that what happened inside would determine not just their own fates, but potentially the lives of hundreds of Apache men, women, and children throughout the territory. Judge Harrison Mitchell had agreed to see them only after Tom Bradley had vouched for Sam's character and insisted that they carried evidence of serious federal crimes. Mitchell was known as a fair but stern man who had little patience for frontier lawlessness, whether perpetrated by Indians, settlers, or government officials. "Remember," Sam said quietly as they climbed the courthouse steps, "we tell the truth, all of it, and let the evidence speak for itself." Grey Wolf nodded, though his weathered face showed the strain of being in an environment completely foreign to his experience. The Apache leader had never been inside a white man's courthouse, and the formal procedures of American justice were as alien to him as tribal customs would be to most whites. Judge Mitchell's chambers were lined with law books and dominated by a massive desk that seemed to dwarf the thin, elderly man who sat behind it. Mitchell's steel-gray eyes studied both men carefully as they entered, taking in their obvious injuries and trail-worn appearance. "Mr. Hayes," the judge said in a voice that carried absolute authority, "your friend, Mr. Bradley, has made some serious allegations about activities in New Mexico territory. Before we proceed, I want to make it clear that this is an informal hearing, not a trial. However, anything you say may be used in future legal proceedings." "I understand, Your Honor," Sam replied, "and I'm grateful for your willingness to hear us out." Mitchell turned his attention to Grey Wolf. "And you are the Apache leader known as Grey Wolf?" "I am," Grey Wolf replied with quiet dignity. "I come here not as enemy of United States, but as man seeking justice for crimes against my people." "Very well. Mr. Hayes, please tell me what has transpired that brings you to my chambers." Sam began with the rescue of Aiyana and Citlali, describing the scene he had found in the canyon and the evidence of the attack on their camp. He spoke carefully and clearly, sticking to facts and avoiding emotional appeals. Judge Mitchell listened intently, occasionally asking questions for clarification but otherwise allowing Sam to tell his story uninterrupted. When Sam reached the part about finding Reynolds' letter from Commissioner Webb, Mitchell's expression grew more serious. "You have this letter with you?" Sam produced the document and placed it on the judge's desk. Mitchell examined it carefully, studying both the letterhead and the handwriting. "This appears genuine," Mitchell observed, "but as evidence, it would need to be authenticated by handwriting experts and verified through official channels." "There's more, Your Honor," Sam continued, and proceeded to describe their encounters with the bandits, the revelation of Webb's systematic campaign against Apache bands, and the attack on his ranch by men claiming to be federal marshals. Grey Wolf spoke up when Sam finished. "Judge Mitchell, my people have lived in peace with whites when treaties were honored. We fight only when attacked, only when families are threatened. This man Webb makes war on women and children, calls it government policy." Mitchell leaned back in his chair, clearly troubled by what he had heard. "These are grave accusations, gentlemen. If true, they represent criminal conspiracy at the highest levels of territorial government. But you must understand, Commissioner Webb is a respected federal appointee with an exemplary record of service." "With respect, Your Honor," Sam said, "we're not asking you to take our word for it. We're asking you to investigate, send federal marshals to examine the sites of these attacks, interview the survivors, check Webb's financial records and correspondence. And while you're investigating," Grey Wolf added, "more Apache families die. Webb moves quickly now, afraid his crimes will be discovered. Every day of delay costs lives." Judge Mitchell was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the bustling streets of San Antonio. Finally, he turned back to his visitors. "I'm going to do something highly irregular," he said. "I'm going to issue a federal warrant for Commissioner Webb's arrest, pending investigation of these charges. I'm also going to order the immediate suspension of all bounty payments and military actions against Apache bands until this matter can be resolved." Sam felt a surge of hope, but Grey Wolf remained cautious. What if Webb refuses to honor federal warrant? What if he has friends who protect him? Mitchell's smile was cold as winter steel. "Mr. Grey Wolf, federal warrants are not requests or suggestions. They are orders backed by the full power of the United States government. If Commissioner Webb attempts to resist arrest or continue his alleged criminal activities, he will discover that there are some authorities even corrupt territorial officials cannot defy." As they left the courthouse, Sam felt cautiously optimistic for the first time in days. But their victory was incomplete. They still needed to reunite with the Apache survivors and ensure their safety, while the federal investigation proceeded. "What now?" Grey Wolf asked as they walked through the busy streets of San Antonio. "Now we go back," Sam replied. "We find our people and make sure they're safe while justice takes its course." But even as he spoke, Sam knew their troubles were far from over. Webb would not surrender quietly, and desperate men often became more dangerous when cornered. The journey back to New Mexico territory would be perilous, and what they would find when they arrived was anyone's guess. 3 days later, as their northbound train carried them back toward the land where their lives had been changed forever, Sam found himself thinking about Aiyana and Citlali. Were they safe in the mountain stronghold? Had they been discovered by Webb's men? The questions tormented him during the long hours of travel. "You worry about children," Grey Wolf observed, noting Sam's restless mood. "They trusted me to keep them safe," Sam replied. "If something happened to them while we were gone." "Children are strong," Grey Wolf said. "Stronger than you think. Aiyana especially, 2014. She has spirit of warrior, heart of protector. She will keep Citlali safe no matter what comes." As if summoned by their conversation about the girls, the train began to slow for an unscheduled stop. Through the window, Sam could see a group of riders approaching the tracks, and his heart nearly stopped when he recognized the familiar figure leading them. It was Aiyana, mounted on a pony, and riding with the confidence of someone born to the saddle. Behind her rode Swift Eagle and 2 other Apache warriors, their faces grim with urgency. "Something's wrong," Grey Wolf said, already moving toward the door of their passenger car. As the train came to a complete stop, Aiyana rode up to their window and called out in a mixture of Apache and English that conveyed desperate urgency. Grey Wolf translated rapidly for Sam. "Webb's men found the stronghold. They're attacking now, with soldiers and artillery. Our people are trapped, running out of ammunition and food." Sam felt his world tilt sideways. After everything they had accomplished, everything they had sacrificed, Webb was making his final move while they were hundreds of miles away and powerless to help. "How many?" Grey Wolf asked his niece in Apache. "Too many," she replied. "But uncle, there is hope. The train, can the Iron Horse carry warriors to fight?" Sam looked at the locomotive, then at Grey Wolf, then at the young Apache girl whose courage continued to amaze him. An idea was forming in his mind. Desperate and probably impossible, but the only chance they had left. "Aiyana," he said, "how many warriors are with Swift Eagle?" 20, she replied. "Good fighters, well armed, but not enough to break through army lines." Sam turned to Grey Wolf with a smile that was part determination and part insanity. "What if we didn't try to break through the lines? What if we brought the fight to Webb himself?" The plan that Sam outlined to Grey Wolf and the Apache warriors was audacious beyond reason, dependent on split-second timing and more luck than any sane person had a right to expect. But it was also their only hope of saving the families trapped in the mountain stronghold. And desperate times called for desperate measures. "Webb will be at the Army command post, directing the attack," Sam explained as they huddled beside the stopped train. "He'll want to personally oversee what he thinks will be his final victory over the Apache. That makes him vulnerable." Swift Eagle looked skeptical. "Army camp will be heavily guarded. 20 warriors against 100 soldiers?" "Not 20 warriors," Sam corrected. 20 warriors plus one very large, very loud, very frightening iron horse bearing down on them at full speed. Grey Wolf's eyes widened as he grasped the full audacity of what Sam was proposing. "You want to attack Army camp with train? Locomotives weigh 40 tons and can reach 60 miles per hour, Sam said. "Nothing on Earth can stop that much iron moving at that speed. We use the train to break their lines, create chaos, and in the confusion we grab Webb and force him to call off the attack. Tom Bradley, who had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm, finally spoke up. Sam, that's not just dangerous, it's suicide. Even if the locomotive could break through their defenses, what's to stop them from just shooting you all down as you try to escape? Sam pulled out Judge Mitchell's federal warrant for Webb's arrest. Once we have Webb in custody under federal authority, they can't continue the attack without risking charges of obstruction of justice. Aiyana had been following the conversation with the intense concentration of someone whose family's lives hung in the balance. Now she spoke up with a suggestion that made everyone stare at her in amazement. What if Army thinks Apache attack from two sides? What if they think stronghold broken out, warriors coming to help? Grey Wolf translated for the others, and Sam could see the strategic brilliance in the young girl's suggestion. If they could make it appear that the trapped Apache had somehow escaped and were launching a coordinated attack, it might create enough confusion to give their desperate plan a chance of success. How do we do that? Swift Eagle asked. Aiyana's smile was fierce with pride and determination. We divide. Half warriors go with Sam and Uncle Grey Wolf on Iron Horse. Other half ride to different place, make much noise, shoot at soldiers from long distance. Army thinks big war party attacks, maybe pull men from stronghold to fight. It was a plan born of desperation and youthful optimism. But as Sam thought about it, he realized it might actually work. The key was timing. Everything would have to happen simultaneously, and there would be no second chances. All right, he said finally. But we do this my way. No unnecessary killing, no pointless heroics. We get Webb, we end this war, and we all go home to our families. The next few hours were spent in frantic preparation. Tom Bradley, despite his reservations, agreed to help them modify the locomotive for their attack. The cowcatcher was reinforced, the steam pressure increased, and every piece of loose equipment in the cab was secured or removed. 10 Apache warriors would ride with the train, concealed in a freight car until the moment of attack. The other 10 would position themselves on the hills overlooking the Army camp, where they could create the impression of a large war party while remaining relatively safe from return fire. As the sun began to set, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and crimson, their improvised war party prepared for what might be the most desperate gamble in the history of the American frontier. Sam checked his weapons one final time and looked around at the faces of the men who had chosen to trust him with their lives. Aiyana, he said, kneeling down beside the young girl who had become like a daughter to him. I want you to stay here with the train crew. This is too dangerous. No, she interrupted firmly. Citlali is in Stronghold. My family fights there. I fight too. Grey Wolf placed a hand on Sam's shoulder. She is Apache. She chooses her own path, as you chose yours when you decided to help 2 lost children. Sam looked into Aiyana's dark eyes and saw the same fierce determination that had sustained her through the loss of her family, the destruction of her camp, and all the dangers they had faced together. She was no longer the frightened child he had found in the canyon. I sees love. She had become a young woman willing to risk everything for the people she loved. All right, he said finally. But you stay close to me, and you do exactly what I tell you when the fighting starts. As full darkness fell, their unlikely assault force began moving toward the distant glow on the horizon that marked the location of Webb's army. The locomotive moved slowly at first, running without lights to avoid detection, while Grey Wolf and his warriors made their final preparations for battle. Sam, Grey Wolf said quietly as they drew closer to their target, whatever happens in next hour, I want you to know, you are truest friend, Apache people, ever had among whites. Your name will be remembered in our stories long after this night is over. Sam felt his throat tighten with emotion. Grey Wolf, these past weeks with your people have been the most meaningful of my life. Whatever happens, I'm proud to call you brother. Ahead of them, the lights of the army camp grew brighter, and Sam could hear the distant sound of artillery firing at the mountain stronghold where desperate families clung to life and hope. In a few minutes, they would either end this nightmare or die trying. As Tom Bradley opened the locomotive's throttle wide and the great iron beast began building speed toward its collision with destiny, Sam offered up a silent prayer for the safety of all the innocents caught up in this conflict. Apache children hidden in mountain caves, soldiers following orders they didn't understand, and most especially 2 young girls who had taught him that courage and compassion could triumph over hatred and greed. The locomotive's whistle screamed its challenge to the night, and 40 tons of iron and steel hurtled toward what might be the final chapter in their incredible story of love, loss, and the unbreakable bonds that could form between strangers when honor mattered more than safety. Behind them, the desert stars watched silently as human beings struggled to prove that justice and mercy could still triumph in a world that often seemed to reward only violence and selfishness. Win or lose, their courage would echo through the years, inspiring others to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. The battle for the soul of the frontier was about to reach its climax, and history would remember this night as the moment when ordinary people chose to become heroes rather than watch evil triumph unopposed. As the locomotive bore down on Webb's camp like an avenging angel wreathed in steam and starlight, Aiyana gripped Sam's hand tightly and whispered in English words she had learned from him. "We fight for family. We fight for justice. We fight together." And in those simple words lay all the truth that mattered. Common. That love could cross any divide, that courage could overcome any obstacle, and that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change the course of history itself. The Iron Horse screamed its defiance at the forces of hatred and corruption, carrying its unlikely crew toward a confrontation that would either vindicate their faith in justice or see them die trying to prove that right was stronger than might. Either way, they would face their destiny together, as family, as warriors, as human beings who had chosen hope over despair and love over fear. The rest was up to the gods and the courage that beat in their hearts like the rhythm of the rails beneath their feet.